And your listening audience, your viewing audience, should come tomorrow and enjoy the whole thing.
For decades, William Shatner was one of the most recognizable faces in the world. Confident, outspoken, and always in control. Or at least, that's how it looked. But another story was unfolding quietly in the background, far from the spotlight. Behind the fame, the success, and the familiar voice, there were struggles, conflicts, and decisions that rarely made headlines at the time. And together, they paint a picture very different from the one most people think they know. Join us as we break down the 25-year double life William Shatner lived. The need to be seen. William Shatner was born on March 22, 1931, in Montreal, Canada, to a Jewish immigrant family. His parents were not wealthy, but they worked hard to stay firmly in the middle class. His father, Joseph Shatner, ran a small clothing business, a line of work that was steady at times but never truly secure. Income could rise and fall, and that uncertainty quietly shaped the household. Money was not absent, but it was never something taken for granted. The Shatner home was practical and disciplined, rather than warm or emotionally open. Affection was not freely expressed, and praise was rare. Like many families of that era, especially immigrant families trying to establish themselves, survival and respectability came first. Emotional closeness came second, if at all. From an early age, Shatner learned that attention had to be earned, not given. As a child, he showed signs of independence and self-reliance. He was confident in his abilities, outspoken, and unafraid to assert himself. At the same time, those traits often masked insecurity. Biographers and childhood accounts suggest that he craved validation even if he rarely admitted it. He wanted to be noticed, listened to, and taken seriously. When that did not happen naturally, he pushed harder. Later in life, Shatner would often describe his youth as stable and supportive, emphasizing confidence rather than vulnerability. However, outside accounts paint a more complicated picture. They describe a young boy who felt emotionally distant from those around him and learned to rely on himself early on. That gap between how Shatner remembered his childhood and how others described it would become a pattern that followed him for decades. Outward certainty paired with an unspoken need for approval. Shatner attended McGill University, one of Canada's most respected schools. It was there that he first encountered formal theater training and classical acting. He studied economics, but theater quickly became his real focus. On stage, he found something he had not fully experienced before: attention that felt earned and direct. When an audience responded, there was no ambiguity about whether he mattered in that moment. At McGill, Shatner trained in traditional Shakespearean acting. The discipline was strict and demanding. Actors were taught precision, projection, and control. Every movement and line delivery mattered. Shatner thrived in this environment. He had a strong voice, a sharp memory, and intense focus. Directors recognized his talent early, but they also noticed something else just as quickly. Even as a student, Shatner developed a reputation for being difficult. He questioned direction, pushed for larger moments, and competed aggressively for attention. His ambition was obvious, and it often rubbed others the wrong way. While some peers admired his confidence, others found it exhausting. He did not blend in, and he did not seem interested in doing so. This was the first clear sign of a pattern that would define much of his career. Shatner did not simply want to succeed, he wanted to stand out. Collaboration mattered less to him than visibility. If a scene could be made bigger or more intense, he believed it should be. That belief sometimes led to strong performances, but it also led to early conflicts with fellow actors and instructors who valued balance and restraint. After finishing his education, Shatner began working in Canadian theatre. The work was respectable, but limited. Canada's entertainment industry was small, and opportunities for major advancement were rare. Like many ambitious young actors, he eventually moved to the United States, believing that real success could only happen there. The transition was not easy. While he found work, it was inconsistent. He was often typecast in rigid or dramatic roles, and many parts were short-lived. Television appearances came and went, and leading roles were rare. Financial pressure became a constant concern. Despite his training and talent, stability remained out of reach. Rejection became a regular part of life. Auditions ended without callbacks. Promising opportunities disappeared without explanation. The gap between effort and reward began to take a psychological toll. Shatner later spoke openly about periods of near anonymity, where he felt invisible despite working constantly. That feeling was deeply unsettling for someone who had tied his self-worth so closely to recognition. This early instability left a lasting mark. It reinforced his belief that control mattered above all else. If attention was scarce, it had to be claimed. If success could vanish overnight, it had to be held tightly once achieved. These lessons shaped how Shatner approached fame later in life, especially when he finally found it. The drive that began in a quiet Montreal household would soon meet an audience large enough to challenge and magnify every part of his personality. And just as he was learning how fragile success could be, one role would change everything and bring new conflicts with it. The birth of a difficult persona. When William Shatner was cast as James T. Kirk in Star Trek, it was not an obvious or guaranteed success. At the time, Shatner was a working actor, not a star. He had appeared in television and theater, but nothing close to what would be considered fame. The role came after years of unstable work, and for Shatner, it felt like a rare and possibly final chance to secure his career. Network executives were unsure about both the show and its lead actor. Science fiction was seen as risky television in the 1960s, and Star Trek faced budget problems, production delays, and constant scrutiny. Some executives questioned whether Shatner had the right presence to carry a series. Others worried that the show itself was too strange to succeed. Shatner did not approach the role quietly. From the beginning, he played Kirk with strong intensity. His delivery was sharp, emotional, and deliberate. He wanted Kirk to command attention in every scene. Shatner believed the captain should always feel dominant, decisive, and central to the story. That belief shaped his performance style and, soon, his behavior on set. He did not see Kirk as just another role. He saw it as a defining opportunity. As a result, he treated every scene as important and every moment on screen as something that needed to land strongly. This approach made Kirk memorable, but it also made Shatner stand out in ways that created friction with others involved in the show. As Star Trek moved forward, reports from cast and crew began to paint a consistent picture of Shatner's on-set behavior. He was competitive, focused, and deeply aware of screen time. Shatner wanted Kirk to be the clear center of the show, and he acted accordingly. Several cast members later said that Shatner closely monitored how scenes were blocked and how lines were delivered. If a moment shifted attention away from Kirk, Shatner often pushed back. He questioned direction, adjusted his performance, and sometimes changed the tone of scenes to pull focus back to himself. While some directors tolerated this because of his talent, others found it exhausting. Billing became another major source of tension. Shatner was billed first, and he guarded that position carefully. Co-stars who gained popularity, especially Leonard Nimoy as Spock, created visible strain. Nimoy's character quickly became a fan favorite. and that attention did not go unnoticed. Behind the scenes, this led to quiet resentment and competition. Cast members described an environment where collaboration often took a back seat to rivalry. Shatner was not accused of open cruelty, but many said he was dismissive, distant, and uninterested in forming close relationships. His focus was the show, his role, and maintaining his status within it. These early conflicts laid the groundwork for feuds that would last decades and shape how Shatner was perceived long after Star Trek ended. Despite its cultural impact, Star Trek struggled during its original run. Ratings were inconsistent, and the show was canceled after just 3 seasons. For Shatner, the cancellation was devastating. Just as he had become widely recognized, the work vanished. What made the situation worse was that fame did not come with financial security. Shatner was not wealthy, and steady roles did not immediately follow. He was known everywhere, but opportunities were limited. Casting directors saw him as Captain Kirk and little else. Typecasting became a serious problem. During this period, Shatner faced severe financial hardship. He struggled to pay bills and, at times, lived out of his truck. These details later became public and stood in sharp contrast to his image as a famous television star. The gap between how he looked to the public and how he lived in private was humiliating. This period deeply affected him. Recognition without stability felt cruel and unfair. He had finally achieved what he had chased for years, yet it brought little security. That frustration hardened him. It reinforced his belief that success could disappear quickly, and that he needed to protect what he had at all costs. The experience also added another layer to his reputation, making him more defensive and more focused on controlling his image. Over time, something unexpected happened. Star Trek did not fade away. Through reruns, fan conventions, and growing fan communities, the show found new life. Shatner slowly realized that Captain Kirk was not a dead end, but a resource. He began attending conventions and engaging with fans. These events showed him that his connection to the character still had value. Fans wanted stories, appearances, and interaction. Shatner recognized that his persona could be shaped, marketed, and sold. Instead of fighting the image, he leaned into it. This marked a turning point. Shatner began to play with public perception. He allowed humor, exaggeration, and controversy to become part of his image. If people saw him as difficult or egotistical, he sometimes embraced that reputation rather than deny it. Attention, even negative attention, became something he could use. This strategy worked. It gave him relevance and income, but it also locked in certain behaviors. The more the persona succeeded, the harder it became to separate the man from the image. The patterns formed during Star Trek, control, competition, and public distance, did not fade. They simply evolved. And as his fame grew louder again, so did the personal conflicts that followed him off the set and into his private life. Love and control. When William Shatner married Gloria Rand in 1956, his career was still taking shape. He was ambitious, driven, and far from stable. Acting jobs came and went, money was uncertain, and long-term success felt just out of reach. The marriage began during a period when Shatner was focused on survival as much as love. The couple had 3 daughters together, and family life quickly became complicated. Shatner's work required long hours, travel, and emotional energy that often left little room for home life. He was frequently absent, both physically and emotionally. Even when he was present, his attention was often pulled toward auditions, performances, and the constant pressure to move forward in his career. As his professional ambitions grew, so did the strain on the marriage. Gloria Rand was left to manage much of the day-to-day family life, while Shatner chased opportunities. According to later accounts, he viewed his career as a necessity that justified sacrifice, while emotional availability became secondary. This imbalance created distance that slowly widened over time. By the late 1960s, Shatner's fame was rising due to Star Trek, but his marriage was falling apart. Success did not bring stability or closeness. Instead, it highlighted how disconnected the relationship had become. The couple divorced in 1969, ending a marriage shaped by ambition, absence, and unmet emotional needs. Shatner married Marcy Lafferty in 1973, a few years after Star Trek had ended. This relationship began with shared understanding. Lafferty was an actress herself, and she understood the pressures of the entertainment industry. At first, this seemed like a better match. However, the timing was difficult. Shatner's career was unstable, and financial stress was a constant issue. Despite being famous, he struggled to find steady work and reliable income. The gap between public recognition and private reality continued to weigh heavily on him. During this marriage, Shatner later admitted that he emotionally withdrew. He became inward-focused, dealing with frustration, disappointment, and fear about his career. Rather than sharing those feelings, he pulled away. Lafferty, facing her own professional challenges, found herself in a relationship where emotional support was limited. As career uncertainty deepened, so did the distance between them. The marriage lacked grounding and security, and communication broke down. By 1981, the relationship had ended in divorce. Once again, Shatner's inability to balance ambition with emotional presence played a central role. Shatner's third marriage, to Noreen Kidd, was the most troubling and short-lived. The relationship was marked by instability from the beginning. Kidd struggled with alcoholism, and her addiction became a defining factor in their life together. Shatner has described himself during this period as a caretaker, but others have questioned whether his role was more complicated. At times, he attempted to help and support her recovery. At other times, his emotional distance and demanding career raised questions about whether he was fully present. The line between support and detachment was unclear. Publicly, Shatner said very little about the struggles in the marriage. Privately, the situation was chaotic. Addiction brought unpredictability, conflict, and fear. Kidd's condition worsened, and the relationship became increasingly strained. In 1999, Kidd was found drowned in the couple's swimming pool. Her death was ruled accidental, with alcohol identified as a major factor. The tragedy shocked the public and cast a dark shadow over Shatner's personal life. The marriage ended not in divorce, but in sudden loss, leaving unresolved questions and lasting emotional damage. In 2001, Shatner married Elizabeth Anderson Martin, hoping for stability later in life. Anderson Martin was not part of the acting world, and the relationship initially appeared calmer and more grounded. They shared interests, including horses and outdoor activities, and seemed genuinely connected. For a time, the marriage worked. Shatner appeared happier and more settled. He spoke publicly about love and companionship, suggesting that he had learned from past mistakes. The relationship gave the impression of renewal and balance. Over time, however, familiar patterns returned. Shatner remained focused on work, public appearances, and personal projects. Emotional distance grew again, and disagreements became more frequent. As the years passed, the marriage deteriorated. In 2019, the couple announced their separation, followed by a contentious divorce finalized in 2020. Disputes over finances and personal matters became public, revealing that stability had once again given way to conflict. Even later in life, with experience behind him, Shatner struggled to maintain emotional closeness within marriage. Across all 4 marriages, clear patterns emerge. Shatner consistently prioritized his career even when personal relationships suffered. Control was important to him, and emotional vulnerability often took a back seat to ambition and self-protection. Publicly, he was charming, articulate, and confident. Privately, many partners experienced emotional distance and isolation. The contrast between Shatner's public persona and his private behavior became a recurring issue. He could perform the connection, but sustaining it long-term proved far more difficult. In interviews and memoirs, Shatner has reflected on his marriages in different ways. At times, he expressed regret and acknowledged mistakes. At other times, he framed events in ways that centered his own perspective, minimizing the impact on others. This mix of reflection and self-mythologizing mirrors the larger pattern of his life. Love was present in each relationship, but it often competed with ambition, control, and fear of instability. Over time, those forces repeatedly won. And just as his personal life kept unraveling, one feud from his past refused to fade quietly away. The death of Noreen Kidd. In August 1999, Noreen Kidd, the third wife of William Shatner, was found dead in the swimming pool at their home in Los Angeles. She was 40 years old. The discovery was sudden and deeply shocking, not only because of her age, but also because of the circumstances surrounding her death. Emergency responders were called, but it was clear very quickly that she could not be saved. An autopsy was performed, and toxicology reports showed that Kidd had a very high blood alcohol level at the time of her death. Alcohol was identified as a major factor in what happened that night. After reviewing the evidence, the Los Angeles County coroner ruled the death an accidental drowning. There were no signs of physical struggle, no evidence of forced entry, and no indication of foul play. The official conclusion was that Kidd, heavily intoxicated, had fallen into the pool and was unable to save herself. Legally and medically, the case was considered closed. Emotionally and publicly, it was anything but. Because of Shatner's fame, the death immediately drew intense media attention. The idea that the wife of a well-known actor had drowned in a private pool raised eyebrows. Questions followed quickly, especially from tabloids that thrived on suspicion and scandal. Some media outlets focused on the isolation of the event. Others questioned why Kidd had been alone near the pool while intoxicated. The combination of alcohol, a private residence, and a famous spouse created an environment where speculation spread easily, even without supporting evidence. Police investigations, however, did not support the rumors. Authorities stated clearly that there was no sign of a crime. Interviews, forensic findings, and the scene itself all pointed to an accident. Despite this, public doubt lingered, fueled by the emotional weight of the story and the media's interest in controversy. Shatner addressed the death publicly in a restrained and emotional way. He expressed grief and spoke openly about Kidd's struggle with addiction. He asked for privacy and avoided engaging with speculation. His response was quiet rather than defensive, but for some observers, silence created as many questions as it answered. To understand why the case remains unsettling for many, it is important to understand Kidd's long struggle with alcoholism. This was not a secret revealed after her death. Shatner had acknowledged publicly that she had battled addiction for years and had been in and out of treatment programs. Alcoholism had placed enormous strain on the marriage. Addiction brought unpredictability, emotional distance, and constant concern. Shatner later said he had tried to help, including arranging treatment and encouraging sobriety. Still, addiction is complex, and recovery is never guaranteed. Questions have persisted about supervision and responsibility. Some wondered whether Kidd should have been alone given her condition. Others questioned whether enough support was in place that night. These questions do not imply wrongdoing, but they highlight the difficult reality of living with someone struggling with addiction. Shatner himself expressed guilt and sorrow in later reflections. He spoke about regret and the limits of what he could control. Addiction does not operate on logic or intention, and even those trying to help can feel powerless. This context does not change the official ruling, but it adds emotional depth to the tragedy. Even with clear forensic findings, the case continues to raise questions for some people. Timing, isolation, and conflicting emotional narratives make it difficult to process. Kidd died young, and her life ended in a way that felt sudden and lonely. That alone is enough to unsettle many observers. There is no evidence of foul play. Investigators found nothing to suggest otherwise, and no credible information has ever challenged the coroner's conclusion. Still, discomfort remains. The presence of fame complicates how tragedies are perceived. Some believe celebrity protects individuals from scrutiny, while others argue it magnifies every detail. In this case, fame did both. Shatner's status brought immediate attention, but it also meant every statement, silence, and emotion was closely examined. The tragedy became public property, even though the pain was deeply personal. The unanswered questions are not legal ones. They are emotional ones. Could something have been done differently? Could the outcome have been prevented? These are questions that often follow deaths linked to addiction, regardless of fame. The death of Noreen Kidd remains one of the darkest chapters in Shatner's life, not because of mystery, but because of the quiet finality of it. It stands as a reminder of how addiction, isolation, and human limitation can collide with devastating results. And while this tragedy never fully faded, another long-running conflict from Shatner's past was still waiting to resurface. The George Takei feud. The conflict between William Shatner and George Takei began during the original run of Star Trek, long before either man openly discussed it in public. At the time, Shatner played Captain James T. Kirk, the clear lead of the show, while Takei played Hikaru Sulu, a supporting but popular character. On paper, their roles were different in importance, but behind the scenes, that difference created tension. From early on, screen time was a sensitive issue. Shatner believed strongly that Kirk should remain the focus of the show. He paid close attention to scripts, scenes, and how stories were structured. Takei, meanwhile, felt that supporting characters were often pushed aside, even when audiences responded positively to them. When Sulu received less dialogue or was removed from episodes, resentment grew. Takei later claimed that Shatner was dismissive toward co-stars and uninterested in collaboration. According to Takei, Shatner rarely engaged with fellow actors socially and treated the set as a place of competition rather than teamwork. While not every cast member shared this view, enough similar accounts emerged to suggest that tension was real, even if it remained mostly unspoken at the time. Years after Star Trek ended, George Takei began speaking openly about his experiences. In interviews, public appearances, and memoirs, he described Shatner as arrogant and self-centered. Takei accused him of intentionally marginalizing other actors to protect his own status as the show's central figure. Takei did not frame the issue as a single argument or moment. Instead, he described a pattern of behavior. According to him, Shatner ignored co-stars on set, avoided acknowledging them in public, and showed little interest in their careers. These actions, Takei said, made the working environment uncomfortable and dismissive. What kept the feud alive was repetition. Takei returned to the subject many times over the years, often when asked about Star Trek. His comments were consistent and emotionally charged. He framed the issue as one of respect and accountability, not personal rivalry. For Takei, the problem was not just Shatner's ego, but also his refusal to recognize the contributions of others. These statements resonated with some fans and media outlets, especially as conversations about workplace behavior and power dynamics became more common. At the same time, they frustrated Shatner, who did not share Takei's version of events. Shatner responded to Takei's criticism in a very different way. Rather than engaging directly with the emotional claims, he often denied or minimized them. He said he had no memory of conflicts and suggested that Takei's resentment was exaggerated or one-sided. In interviews, Shatner frequently framed the feud as something that existed mostly in Takei's mind. He described himself as focused on his work, not on undermining others. When confronted with specific accusations, he often claimed he was unaware of any harm caused. This selective memory became one of the most frustrating aspects of the feud for observers. Shatner also used humor and irony as tools. He joked about the conflict, brushed it off with sarcasm, and sometimes made light of Takei's anger. For his supporters, this came across as confidence and resilience. For critics, it looked like avoidance and refusal to take responsibility. At no point did Shatner offer a clear apology for Takei's experience. Even when acknowledging that others might have felt hurt, he stopped short of admitting fault. This approach kept the feud alive, as it left Takei feeling unheard and invalidated. The reason this feud lasted for decades lies in power imbalance and unresolved resentment. During Star Trek, Shatner held the most power on set. He was the lead actor, the face of the show, and the person most protected by producers and networks. Takei, like other supporting actors, had little ability to challenge that dynamic at the time. Years later, when Takei finally spoke openly, Shatner no longer held the same level of control, but he still controlled the narrative of his own behavior. By refusing to acknowledge harm, he maintained his version of events. This refusal became the central issue. For Takei, accountability mattered more than reconciliation. He wanted recognition that something had gone wrong. For Shatner, acknowledgement felt unnecessary, possibly even threatening to his self-image. This difference in priorities made resolution nearly impossible. The feud reveals a great deal about Shatner's interpersonal style. He is confident, focused, and often emotionally distant. He values control and narrative authority. When challenged, he deflects rather than reflects. This approach has helped him survive public scrutiny, but it has also left personal conflicts unresolved. In the end, the feud was never just about screen time or billing. It was about memory, recognition, and whether power should come with responsibility. That question remains unanswered between them. And as this long-running conflict stayed frozen in time, Shatner's story kept moving forward into yet another complicated chapter. If you found this story interesting, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let us know in the comments what part surprised you the most.